Hello. I guess I'm back presenting again, I think. Yes, I am. Okay, so I already did a bit of an introduction to Neil. So let me just say that he is Biodiversity Strategy Manager with Network Rail, and he's currently leading on the work to baseline the biodiversity on the railway estate. So Neil, I'm going to throw over to you. What can you tell us?
Thanks very much, Steve, and hopefully everything's working. If you give us a quick thumbs up, just make sure you can hear me and see my slides. So thank you very much. Hopefully I can run through quickly what Network Rail are doing and how we've been here. Big thanks to my colleagues Jess, Hannah, Chloe, Jen, Richard and Rachel for giving me this opportunity, and also thank you to BugLife. Network Rail, for those of you who might not know, is a very large organisation. We cover all 3 countries in Britain. There's a bunch of numbers I'll let you read on the screen there, but key is the fact that we have 52,000 hectares of land across England, Scotland and Wales. And we were talking about numbers of people and how opportunities are for a load of people. There is a railway within 500 meters of 1/3 of the population of Britain, and that's something, you know, we have a massive obligation to manage our 52,000 hectares of land, which is the Isle of Wight and a half if you squashed us all into a small lump. And Network Rail has a real big commitment to biodiversity and the way that we manage our estate. We have a target of having no net loss of biodiversity by 2024 and net gain by 2035, no mean feat on itself. And in order to help us achieve that, we've just published at the end of last year our environmental sustainability strategy, which helps us with key milestones to achieve those targets, and also our biodiversity action plan. And where my colleagues have helped is they've been involved with one of Network Rail's accelerated leaders programs, which takes the bright young things and moves them up through the business. And they recognized an opportunity. They have to work with a charity, and they chose BugLife. And they looked at that map there, which is the rail network across mainland Britain. And they looked at that, and then also at the BugLife maps that we've seen from Jamie and from others earlier on in the presentations before the break. And you can see that there's an opportunity there. If you overlay the two, not only can we align some of those, but we can also put places in where there isn't currently a route. And what they've looked at is they've worked with colleagues in Anglia around Norwich, where we do across the whole network. We need to do work at this particular location specifically because of issues during autumn. You can see all the trees there. Everybody knows about leaves on the line, but it's also, we saw with Tanya, looking at the safety of the people who are working next to the tracks and the visibility of those people, and also the train drivers. And so work was taking place in this particular area, and they've looked at where that site was, but also overlaying the beeline sites. And you can see that it's right in the middle of one of those beelines just outside Norwich. And we now have the first railway beeline pollinator project taking place at the moment. And what we've looked at is a particular location. I've put a box around this particular signal because it appears in a photo in a minute, and you can see the tree right next to that signal is getting quite close, so we do need to manage that vegetation. It also looks like ash, so we might have an issue with ash dieback. And what the team have done down in Norwich, and there you can see that signal again, is that they've looked at the vegetation, they've raked the areas at the top of that embankment slope down to the bottom to create habitat piles for the hedgehogs and the other wildlife that Steve mentioned in his opening address. And then the area where they've cleared all that material from is going to be sown with particular wildflower seeds that are relevant to the area around Norwich. And we can then start to see that improvement and how we can transform the habitat from something that didn't work for the railway, but can now work for the wildlife in that particular area. And with new data that we're collecting on Network Rail land and adjacent to us at the moment, we now have some of the same sort of data that Jamie was using to create the beelines, and we now have this for the whole of the railway network up to 1 kilometre outside of the railway. And what you can see there is all the different types of habitats that we have next to that railway line. And again, you can see how that aligns with where the beelines are, and also where we can add to places where there currently aren't beelines. And what we've done with that particular site just outside Norwich, the grey here, we talked about sort of the amount of grey, and we saw it in the animation at the beginning. What that is that's the urban, that's the built up areas, and the black is the same. And the site where we're trialing this work, just out on that railway line outside Norwich, you can see there's a lot of grey in between the colours. And what we can do is we can start connecting those habitats, not only in those sort of the urban or the sort of the arable areas, but in those urban deserts that we were talking about earlier on. We can start connecting that with the right habitat in the right place. And what I just think is, just to finish off very quickly, just to get back some time, that was just 1 mile just outside Norwich. And this is a section of the beelines around Peterborough. If you then overlay the railway network on top of the beeline map, you can see that there's a lot of connection, but there's also those areas where, you know, we have that opportunity. Imagine what we can do if you have the whole network, not just that 1 mile outside Norwich. And I think that's where, you know, we can get involved with BugLife, with others organizations, with the people who live next door to the railway, those 7 million neighbors that we've got, those 30 million people just outside that 500-meter area, and see what we can do and what we can actually achieve. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Neil, we're deeply indebted to you, first of all, for getting us back on time by basically sprinting through your presentation. I really, really appreciate that. But I think more than that, you know, it's a really graphic representation of what can be done and what can be achieved here. You know, we talked about the beelines as being like railway lines, linking up the nation. So surely getting the actual literal railway lines involved has to be the biggest and best of opportunities. Neil, we are so, so lucky to have you. Thank you. Thank you so much for all you're doing. Great job.
Thanks, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We are now going to move on to our next speaker. So Adam Henson is one of the best known farmer in the UK, presenting on various television programs about rural life. But farming and conservation are Adam's first passions. And when the camera stops rolling, he says there's still plenty of work on the farm to be done. According to Adam, growing up in the Cotswold Hills as a farmer's son was a great start to life, and it spurred his enthusiasm to become a farmer. He now jointly runs a 650-hectare estate together with the Cotswold Farm Park, home to over 50 breeding flocks and herds of British rare breed farm animals. Unfortunately, Adam can't be with us here today, but he has recorded for us a video from his farm where he'll talk about how he's helping pollinators on site. So let's see if we can roll that video now. I think that we've lost Adam's video there. I'm sure that if that's not right, then someone will take me off air and we'll go back to that video. But in the meantime, let me introduce our next speaker in the hope that that's what's happened and this is who we're going to bring on. So I think next we're going to hear from Amy Coulthard.
Hi,
Let me
Steve.
just see. Yes, hello, we are. So she's currently Director for Nature's Recovery at Avon Wildlife Trust and has worked in nature conservation for 20 years. But her passion for the natural world began as a child spotting butterflies and birds. She believes that everyone can make space for nature, whether that's a window box or at the farm scale. Amy has been involved in beeline since the early development stage in the west of England in 2013, when she was working at Natural England as a land management advisor. And since 2014, Avon Wildlife Trust has engaged over 300 landowners to deliver over 150 hectares of habitat restoration within beelines. Amy, that is really impressive. Over to you.
Thank you, Steve. I'm also going to rattle through a little bit to see if we can just get some extra time, but bear with me just while I share my screen, if it's going to work. Okay, I think we're working. Fantastic. Great. So yes, I think I have one of the best jobs in the world working for a wildlife trust. And I've been really privileged to have such a great career with the Wildlife Trust and statutory bodies. And actually, this is where we begin our journey for the West of England beelines, was with a whole lot of different partners around the table. as other projects did and have already said, actually that's critical to starting a Beelines project, is really getting everybody involved, because that buy-in right from the very start is what allows you to achieve great things. And we had everybody involved, all the farm advisors. So we had FWAG, we had Natural England, but we also had the local authorities there from the start, which has made it much easier to engage them around other activities like road verges and amenity grassland going forwards. But the reason we were all able to get behind the project was actually a really clear vision to create our network of Beelines. We had that right from the start, and it's a fantastic thing to communicate Beelines. It's really easy concept to get across to people, whether you're an entomologist or actually just somebody interested in local habitats. And I've spoken to some amazing people working with local groups today who are doing fantastic work on the ground in their little patch in their back garden. And everybody can get the concept of Beelines. We all know that we need roads to move around or rail to move around, and actually that pollinators need the same in the landscape. So we kicked off with our modelling, a healthy dose of local knowledge and some biscuits at that workshop, and then it was time to really crack on and get some delivery on the ground. It felt a little bit daunting at first, thinking that we had this monumental task to achieve. We looked at it and thought, oh, that's pretty big. That's pretty big. So what we did was the Beelines focused our efforts within the west of England, but then we focused our efforts within the Beelines themselves. And we've run a series of different projects, each one with a slightly different focus as we've moved forwards. And we started off by focusing on local wildlife sites, because we felt that they were some of our most important places for pollinators, but actually they were increasingly not being managed as well as they could be, or being little islands fragmented. So they were a good starting point for us. The designations like sites of special scientific interest they do get some attention, not as much as they really need, but local wildlife sites really do get overlooked quite often. So that was a focal point for us. We also focused in the early days on the southern Cotswolds, so the area just north of Bath. And we've then gone on to have focus areas in the Mendip Hills and the Bristol and Bath urban fringe. And the Bristol and Bath urban fringe, for example, was a great place to focus, because it gave us a whole new volunteer base and the opportunity to work with housing developers, which we hadn't done before, and really looking at the realities of whether we could build pollinator habitat into new development right from the start at the design stage. So each of these different phases to the project has added new value to the Beelines approach, aligning to other opportunities within the area, but also other work areas where we've been focused. So for example, Bristol and Bath urban fringe, that linked in really nicely with our My Wild City project, so that we were creating pollinator habitat not only on the fringe sites, but also into the city itself. So each of these different phases has increased our geographical range, increased our impact, and certainly given us a whole variety of opportunities for engagement with individuals, local communities, and other stakeholders. And like I said, the concept's so easy to communicate that at each stage we haven't found people struggling to engage with it. We've been overwhelmed with volunteers and people willing to work with us. So as Steve said, we've been fortunate enough to have contact with over 300 landowners. 130 of those continue to be engaged in activities on their land. So we've been running the project since 2014. Now in 2021, those landowners continue to work with us. And in that time, they've created over 230 hectares of pollinator habitat. So that's just quantifying the habitat that's been created at scale. There's a whole series of other smaller areas that we have yet to completely finish adding up to see just exactly how much hectareage we've got there. We've also planted over 300 trees. Most of those are orchard trees. and substantial lengths of hedgerow, and fencing to facilitate grazing so that management can be improved. But what's really staggering is the 3,160 volunteer days that have gone into beelines. And that's from 540 individual volunteers over 371 work days. That time that they've given was worth over £150,000 to us. And we're really grateful for that. But also each and every one of those volunteers has had their own experience and their own message to take home. And if you think of 540 volunteers out there as pollinator champions, talking to their neighbours, talking to their friends and their family about beelines and why it's so important that they think about their garden, think about their window box, that's just phenomenal. And you have a similar effect with the landowners that we've worked with. You know, we hope very much that they influence their neighbours, and you know, they say how easy it's been to create habitat on their farms, because actually, again, that's the beauty of beelines, is that a lot of these actions are really simple to do and can be built into whatever size of space you've got, however big or small. Oh dear, my slides aren't moving on. There we go. So what next? Well, we're currently focused on the Mendip Hills at the moment and connecting our beelines with the Somerset Wildlife Trust beelines, which are now underway. But also we're very focused on embedding beelines into the Nature Recovery Network. So the West of England Nature Partnership launched our Nature Recovery Network 2 years ago now. And it shares the same data sets as the beelines. So it's not surprising that actually the beelines overlay quite nicely over a lot of the Nature Recovery Network. The Nature Recovery Network takes in a much wider range of habitats, but the two do link up very, very nicely. And some of our ambitions to, for example, link the Cotswolds and the Mendips via beelines is now a key target for us within our Nature Recovery Network programme. So I think that there's an awful lot that can be learned about delivering a Nature Recovery Network from beelines. I think we ought to be thinking about, actually, when it comes to delivering Nature Recovery Networks, what do we already know from beelines? Well, we know that partnerships are important. We know that having a clear vision for what you're trying to achieve is really important. And we know that actually we've got a lot of great data and evidence that can point us in the right direction for where we should focus our efforts. And if we're all lined up behind the same vision and the same plan of action, we can deliver a lot more and we can have a much greater impact. It also gives us something that everybody can get behind, whether you're an individual, a landowner, or an organisation. And again, that's something that the Nature Recovery Network, we can learn from that. So for Avon Wildlife Trust, we plan to continue our beelines. We know it's a long-term project. We know that it's something that we can't achieve quickly, but by setting out different steps that we're going to take, and each little step that we take is a step further forwards to completing our beelines. And we have embedded it into everything that we do. Like Cumbria, we have a wildflower nursery, so we supply our own plants, all of which are of local provenance. We know where the seed comes from. We collect seed from our nature reserves for that, and we also grow our own. We've got our own living seed banks on site where the wildflower nursery is, and that has now gone national. You can buy your wildflowers from us online. So whilst local provenance has been really important to us, actually we're quite excited to be thinking about where we might expand that next. So I think I'm done on my time. It just leaves for me to say thank you to everybody that supported our work and worked with us. We couldn't do it without you. It's definitely a partnership effort, and a bit of a thank you to everybody that has funded the project as well. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. There's no doubt that we are so much stronger when we work together and work in partnership with all the other organisations around the nation that have the same end game. And we're now going to watch a short video of Bug Life's Beeline's work in Scotland, presented by Natalie Stevenson, who is Bug Life's Scotland manager. The video showcases work carried out on the 134-mile John Muir Pollinator Way and within the Clyde Valley. So sit back, relax, and be ready to see some stunning clips of bees and other pollinators buzzing away in the grasslands of central Scotland. Hello again, you all. So I'm going to crack straight on and introduce Matt Shardlow, who I'm sure most of you will know already. He is our CEO here at Bug Life, and he's been our chief executive since 2002. Matt studied agricultural restoration at UEA and was formerly chair of the Wildlife and Countryside Link legal strategy group. He's currently a country diary columnist in The Guardian, a Broads Authority member, and member of BBC Rural Affairs Committee. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's really great that we're getting together today when we've got the bees and the flies starting to come out and spring bursting into the countryside, and we're talking about a new spring for the pollinators of the United Kingdom with beelines as their route to freedom. I'm aware we're just approaching the 1 minute silence that we're recognizing today in honor of those we've lost during the COVID pandemic. There's so many people who've suffered so much during this last year, and today is the year anniversary of when that happened. So if I know some of you will be wanting to observe that minute silence, so we'll go into a minute silence now in respect of those we've lost during the COVID period. Thank you very much. So I think it's been a brilliant day. We've been testing the envelope and we'll do a little bit more of that later with the breakout rooms, which I hope you'll enjoy networking in. I'm very privileged to have seen beelines develop from a concept into the vibrant national endeavour, now supported by hundreds of organisations across the United Kingdom. Scientists like Jeff have been telling us for decades that nature is too fragmented, that climate change will exert extreme pressures on wildlife. Everyone has heard of the dreadful declines of bees and insects. The experts know we must restore an active network of wildlife habitats in the countryside so that species have the chance to move through landscapes and to repair our increasingly fragile natural environment. Beelines demonstrate how a bottom-up approach can produce a nationally coherent nature recovery map. We've watched them grow vigorously from the seed that we planted in 2011 in Yorkshire with Natural England and the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and local authorities. Hundreds of partner organisations and land managers have got us to this point, and I thank them all. Many of them are carefully placing high-quality, wildflower-rich stepping stones across that map. With Wildlife Trust and WWF, we even promoted a private members bill to put beelines on a statutory footing a couple of years ago. This helped us secure legislative commitments to nature recovery networks and mapping funds through the Environment Bill particularly. In Scotland, beelines have already been incorporated into the government's national action plans. Sometimes an idea just finds the right moment and becomes unstoppable, and I'm so pleased that beelines has now become such an idea. But now the real challenge comes. We've got to fill in the beelines. We've completed that mapping exercise with all those hundreds of people and all that data. And now we've got to fill the beelines. We've got to make them work. We've got to make them the stepping stones, the corridors through the countryside for our wildlife. So today we're setting a new target. We're aiming to convert an additional 10% of the beelines into flower-rich pollinator habitat. The calculations show that this will significantly improve the ability of species to disperse through the countryside, to respond to a changing climate, and to move into the areas where they're going to live in the future. As we move into full habitat delivery mode, I must acknowledge the dedication and skills of the dozens of officers and volunteers in BugLife, the Wildlife Trust, Natural England, local authorities, and many other organisations whose excellent work has enabled us to get here. If I try to thank everyone I need to thank, we'll be here all day, but I will have a go at it. We must look at restructuring payments to farmers, getting the new agri-environment schemes across the countries to work so that they transform the delivery of public goods such as pollination. While for local authorities, opportunities are coming up to produce habitat gains in beelines from the planning process and new biodiversity recovery responsibilities. These bodies can attach the engines to beelines that will support and enable work to be done by farmers and local people. It is fantastic that the national parks are already incorporating beelines into their draft local nature recovery strategies, and we hope that all local authorities will add beelines to their local nature recovery maps. If we all pull together, the next decade can be one of hope for our insects. Thank you so much to all the speakers we've had today. I mean, they've been great. Thank you particularly to Jeff for his summary of the importance of pollinators to us and the absolutely crucial reasons why we need to turn around those declining populations. Chania gave some great examples from the Get Cumbria Buzzing project of how putting the habitats in along beelines really works. And thank you very much to Neil for his dedication and the work that they're doing with Network Rail, getting the management of that network right for pollinators as well. Thanks to Adam for his video about the importance of pollinators and farming, and to Amy from the Avon Wildlife Trust about talking about green hay and how to get local mix right for pollinators and the local ecology. And of course, a huge thank you to Steve Backshall for taking time out of his very packed schedule, filming and writing. He's been wonderful today. So thank you very much, Steve, for chairing the event. We also want to thank Robin and Louise from Digital Leaders for our help with this platform and getting all of you on here today. We've had 400 people today, so it's been a fantastic event, and I hope you've enjoyed the stuff as much as me. The web form has been a bit challenging from time to time, but I think we're getting the hang of it, and I'm looking forward to the discussion rooms at the end and, you know, experimenting, moving between some tables and all that sort of thing. Finally, a massive thank you to Holly McCain, who's been the linchpin of organising today with Jamie Robbins, Paul Hetherington and Andrew Whitehouse, who've also made vital contributions. And of course, thank you to you. Thank you to all of the attendees. We've been blown away by the amount of interest we've had from everyone, and, you know, for giving up your time to hear a bit more about beelines and what we can do. Many of you have already been involved with mapping beelines, and it's inspiring that you've now come back together at the point where we need to start taking action to improve the area of habitats in the beelines for the pollinators. We also have thanks, obviously, to all the funders. I can't list them all because, you know, our projects have had dozens of funders, but so have all the other organisations. But in particular, I'd like to acknowledge funding from Co-op Bank, which hoped to get the scheme up and running in the first place. Funding from all four of the governments: Garfield Western, People's Postcode Lottery, National Lottery Heritage Fund, BIFA, Getty Foundation, Esme Fairbairn, among many others. So the take-home messages. We've got our report, the link's in the chat, so please have a look at our beelines report and share that with others. We're aiming to increase by 10% the area of pollinator habitat in the beeline, so please help us to achieve this. Let us know about projects that you're involved with and working on. Add them to our interactive beelines map on our website so everyone else can see the work that's happening to fill the beelines. And for those getting involved now, you can use the beeline map to see where your organisation or your land is on the beeline. And of course, we can share that digital information if you're wanting to incorporate the beelines into your own maps. The event has been recorded, So visit our website later in the week to watch the recording and share it with your colleagues. I look forward to networking with you after the event. Thank you very much for coming today, and thank you again to Steve. I think now we're going to go straight into the Digi Lounge for a bit of networking. So thank you everyone for coming.
And thank you, Matt. Yes, that's right. So this will be the end of the conference, but we will be able to go into that Digi Lounge, as Matt said, for some networking. As Matt said at the beginning of his talk there, this all feels very timely, doesn't it? You know, in the last few days, all of a sudden the bugs are back, just as our first butterflies are emerging and the lacewings and bees out looking for a nest. Had the Dorbenton's bats hunting over the river for the first time that I've seen last night. And the bugs re-emerging at this time of year is always, for me, a sign of new beginnings. Let's hope that this Beeline project can be just that. There's so much food for thought here, from Jeff's rather sobering open address, putting into context quite how dire our invertebrate decline is here in the UK and quite how dramatic the negative effects of that decline could be, almost impossible to quantify. But then we've heard from Tanya and Claire and Amy and Jamie about how we can set the problem right, and from Neil about how our existing national transport infrastructure can be a part of the solution. Roads and motorways now. Canal networks, aim big. You know, let's completely pepper the country with our fabulous beelines. I've been following much of the comments here, and it's clear that you all are kind of not the average audience, that many of you are already well versed in the miracle that is beelines and what a bountiful bug superhighway across our nation would mean. Our task now is getting the message out there. Spread the word, let people know what this means, what it could achieve, and that it's already happening. It strikes me that this is an ideal concept and project for our schools, our scout groups to be involved with. Perhaps Neil can help us out with that one. So we're going to leave the networking area open. But for now, from me and everyone else at Bug Life, thank you all very, very much, and goodbye.